There are lots of open spots here, and you can see really well from there. Also, the first row, as always, has a lot of seat stuff. So come on down if you're looking to sit. Looks like we have a lot of standards tonight. That's also fun. So then, I'm sure some folks will still trickle in, but I wanted to just welcome all of you to this important event tonight. My name is Labyrinth. I'm one of the owners of Labyrinth, and hey folks, can we get sort of the hum to die down so that we can all join together now? All right, thank you. Yeah, I was so glad when the ACLU of New Jersey asked if we could hold an event on book banning here in our space tonight. The director, the president, I think, of the American Librarians Association, whose name is Emily Drabinsky, she was on an interview on the Other Clay show that some of you may have heard recently, and she made a strong and clear argument that when we say not those books, we're saying not those people. And bookstores today live in a sort of adjacent wing of the same contested space as libraries do. And so we are really grateful that we are all here tonight to have this important conversation. I now get to hand things over to Jean Cicero, who is the legal director of ACLU New Jersey. And
Thank you, Dorothea, and I want to thank Labyrinth Books generally for hosting this important event tonight. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight, the Princeton Public Library, Princeton University Press, and Princeton General Sexuality Resources. At the heart of our discussion tonight is the idea about how we as a community engage with different viewpoints and experiences. And I know that we all come to this with our own ideas about democracy, about power, identity, and access to information. And our intention tonight is to create a space to learn from our panelists who will engage with these ideas. We have one key ground rule, and that's to please respect our panelists and our attendees by not speaking at them or over them. And if there are consistent interruptions, you may be asked to leave. What we're doing tonight is taking written questions for the Q&A portion of our event, and there are pens and note cards available at the registration table, and we'll also pass them out during the event for anyone who wants to submit a question. And then a select number of questions will be read aloud by me during the Q&A portion. I just want to, for comfort levels, our exits are the staircase behind us. There's also an elevator behind the staircase, and in the event of an emergency, there's an exit in the back of the building, as well as one that way. But just make yourself acquainted with those. And then there are restrooms upstairs in the back of the store if you need them. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on how book bans undermine identities and restrict information. Just a little bit about the ACLU of New Jersey. We've worked to defend liberty and justice guided by a vision for a fair and equitable New Jersey for all since our founding in 1960. And our mission has been to preserve, advance, and expand the individual rights and liberties guaranteed by our state and federal constitutions. We do this in the courts, in the legislatures, and in our communities. We strive to be anti-racist, and we're actively committed to advancing racial justice for people here in New Jersey. Now, nationally, the ACLU has been around for more than 100 years, and has worked essentially for that whole time to challenge censorship. And that's because the First Amendment protects our right to read, to learn, and to discuss vital and sometimes controversial topics. Banned Books Week was started yesterday and runs through October 7th, and it was launched in 1982 in response to a sudden surge in the number of challenges to books that are in libraries, bookstores, and schools. And I just heard the president of the ALA say that in the last year, that number has been the highest it's ever been in our history. So the annual Banned week event highlights the value of free and open access to information and brings together our entire book community, librarians, educators, authors, publishers, booksellers, and readers of all types. And we do that in shared support of the freedom to seek and express ideas. So we decided to organize this discussion because of this intense, recent and increasing campaigns to censor information in our public schools and libraries. And we'll hear in a minute from our panelists more about what that has looked like in New Jersey. And since we're in Princeton, I just wanted to note that just recently, the university president, Eisgruber, wrote a forceful and moving defense of academic freedom and against censorship to a congressman who attacked the inclusion of a book on a course syllabus. And I really encourage you all to look at the letter. I found it very moving, and it's on the university's blog. But he wrote that the university community's co-equal commitments to inclusivity and to free speech and to academic freedom, and suggested that those who disagree with a book are free to criticize it, but not to censor it. Such arguments are the lifeblood of a great university where controversies must be addressed through deliberation and debate, not administrative fiat. Arguments and deliberations are also the lifeblood of a great democracy. And so I hope that we can advance those discussions here tonight. But before we start our panel, we have a special guest to kick us off. Senator Zwicker, who I saw a minute ago, there he is a scientist who represents the 16th district, which includes Princeton, and we're grateful for his work fighting book bans.
I am so delighted to be here, delighted to see so many people out here tonight, delighted to represent Princeton, and delighted to represent the fight for the right to read and the right to just for freedoms overall. Very quickly, I have to assume, having heard many of these wonderful people speak, that what you're about to hear is both going to be infuriating, upsetting, and the reality of what's going on right now. I just wanted to spend a moment to tell you sort of what's happening at the state level, because after hearing one of our panels, Martha Hickson, and she'll tell the story much better than I could ever tell it. Hearing a panel like this, I put together, along with Senate Majority Leader Teresa Ruiz, the New Jersey Right to Read Act. And bottom line, I can take you through all details, but the most important thing is that the goal is to have the strongest right to read legislation in the entire country and have it on Governor Murphy's desk by the end of this calendar year. Right? And so to do that, we're going to need everybody's help, right? Because the other side, as we know, is full of hate and they're organized very well. Right? But I just want to say thank you for putting this together. I want to say a particular thank you to Martha for sharing her personal story with me and being inspiration for that. I just met today, literally a couple hours ago, with the New Jersey State librarian and her team to make sure that what we're putting forth is going to be strong, constitutional, and have the backing of everybody. So thank you for a couple of minutes. I'm really looking forward to hearing about tonight.
So without further ado, I'll introduce you to our esteemed panel. I'll start with Martha Hickson, who's in the middle. She has been a high school librarian since 2005 and is the New Jersey Librarian Association's 2023 Librarian of the Year. Since 2019, she has successfully rallied community support to defend challenges against 6 books, all with LGBTQ+ themes. For that work, the National Coalition Against Censorship presented Martha with the Judith Krug Outstanding Librarian Award. And the American Library Association has awarded Martha with the Lemony Snicket Prize for the Noble Librarian's Face with Adversity. That's in recognition of her energy and bravery in the face of persistent and ongoing hostility while advocating for her students' First Amendment right to read. Next to her, we have Casey Meehan. She is the Freedom to Read Program Director at PEN America. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and human rights and protects free expression writ large, and in particularly defends writers, artists, and journalists worldwide. So Casey leads initiatives to protect the rights of students to freely access literature in schools. We also, we also have Brielle Winslow-Majette, who is the Deputy Director of Garden State Equality, the largest LGBTQ+ advocacy and education organization in New Jersey. Brielle was named on Insider New Jersey's LGBTQ Power List and has overseen many initiatives helping to bring awareness and solutions to multiple inequities affecting the LGBTQ community. Since the start of 2023, she's traveled the state speaking to universities, professional organizations, state agencies, and others to bring awareness about the attacks on the LGBTQ community and how transformative allyship can create safer spaces. So with that, I think I'd like to zoom out and start by talking about what's happening at the national landscape. And so, Casey, I was hoping you can talk to us about that and some of the trends that PEN America's been documenting.
Sure. Hello. Thank you for having me. I have a little seasonal allergy, so if my voice gives out, that's why. Or it could be that I'm overcome with. No, I'm just kidding. I do this every day. It's okay. So PEN America for the last a little bit over 2 years now, have been tracking censorship attempts in K-12 public schools, as well as the way in which there's prohibitions on content and identities and histories playing out across what we call as like educational institutions. So that could be your public K-12 schools, your public libraries, as well as higher ed. We also have seen it show up in museums or other kind of civic places of learning. We call it the Ed Scare. So it's this overarching campaign to ban specific viewpoints and concepts. It overwhelmingly targets materials focused on race and racism or featuring characters of color, as well as materials or content on LGBTQ+ individuals and communities, as well as gender identity and sexual orientation. So the components of Ed Scare, we see these playing across educational institutions, as I mentioned, and what, not to go right here, but it really relies on these authoritarian tactics. So it's relying on intimidation, on fear, on threats. It's censoring the work of authors. It's interfering with the rights of students. It's undermining the role of teachers and librarians and other professionals, and ultimately sowing division in our communities. So PEN has played a role sort of both in research and also communicating and amplifying what's happening, along with a suite of other amazing national organizations, ALA, NCAC, others, to help emphasize how book bans is almost like the bellwether. I think book bans to me have something been very accessible to understand. Books are available and then they're taken from access. It's a bellwether moment that we can all use to understand a larger campaign at play. But ultimately, book bans are suppressing diverse voices, and they're really compromising our public schools' ability to prepare students to be thoughtful and engaged citizens, to offer them space to freely read and freely learn. So that's what's going on. No, I'm just kidding. So we just released a report last week looking at the 2022-2023 school year. Again, we're tracking a rise in book bans this year, where we counted over 3,000 instances of book bans across 33 states, Democrat and Republican alike, but certainly the scale and magnitude of book bans in Republican-leaning states is much higher. We talk about the role of advocacy groups in driving for book bans, as well as the role legislation is playing, both in empowering book bans, but certainly with New Jersey and Illinois and Maryland and other states and California kind of leading the way to also offer legislation to oppose and resist book bans. So there's lots of upsetting, undemocratic things happening, but there's lots of hope here too with students and many leaders, and parents and librarians and activists and others leading the way to push back against bans.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's one of, I remember hearing Martha's story, which I'll ask you about in just a second, and being just so surprised that it was happening here in New Jersey. And it seemed, and that was in 2021. and it's just increasing, and we've been hearing from librarians and educators across the state. And so I guess, Martha, maybe you can share a little bit about your personal experience with fighting book bans, and since you've been at this kind of center point in the state, can you talk about what you're seeing here in New Jersey and what's changed maybe since 2021?
Sure, I can do both of those. But before I do, I want to plug an event because Senator Zwicker is here. That's going to be happening right here in Princeton on Saturday at 11 o'clock at the Byron Rustin Center for Social Justice. Our own Senator Zwicker, in recognition of the outstanding work that he has been doing, will receive the Defenders of the Right to Read Award at the Byron Rustin Center. You are all invited. It's a brunch. So you can go to the Byron Rustin Center website or Facebook page to learn more about it. Now, why is Martha sitting here talking to you about book banning? Because in 2021, as Jean indicated, at that time I was in my 17th year as a high school librarian. I had skated through 17 years blissfully without a real live book challenge, and then suddenly on September 28th, 2021, a date that goes down in Martha infamy, 5 book challenges simultaneously, all to LGBTQ plus books. In addition to objecting to the books, these book banners objected, it was Banned Books Week when this happened, they objected to Banned Books Week. And worst of all for me, they objected to Martha and labeled me a pornographer, pedophile, and groomer of children at a board meeting that has now been viewed online more than 5,000 times. And my life became a turmoil immediately, and that is why I'm here now, because they got me mad, and I'm fighting it. Now, in terms of, it's not just me, clearly it's not just me. This is happening to librarians across the country in droves. And I have this conversation almost every day because when I talk to people here in my home state of New Jersey, almost every day, people are like, oh yeah, that's I hear that's happening in Texas and Florida. It's so sad. That's terrible. How awful. And I'm like, hold up. It's happening here. They don't believe it. They don't know. So let me clue you in. Since 2021, over the last 2 years, we have seen attempts to remove books from school and public libraries in 11 of New Jersey's 21 counties. Those challenges have affected at least 38 titles, all with themes relating to LGBTQ plus people or people of color. One of the trends that shows up in the work that Casey does at PEN America, and by the way, PEN America has been like my life raft through all of this. The work that PEN America does is amazing. But one of the trends that both PEN and the ALA are observing is that in the olden days when there was a book challenge, it was one person challenging one book. Not anymore. It's multiples. In fact, last year, the American Library Association found that 90% of the book challenges were to multiple books simultaneously, just as I experienced with the 5. 40% of those last year were for 100 or more books at a time. Now, we're not seeing the 100 or more in New Jersey quite yet, but as I indicated, my challenge started with 5. Most of last year, Hamilton Township dealt with 7 books simultaneously. Roxbury is dealing with 11, and there is a person in my community who now claims he has 50 books in my high school library that he wants to go after. And P.S., his wife is running for the Board of Education. So guess where my future is headed. As Casey indicated, these are not organic book challenges. An organic book challenge is when a parent becomes aware of a book that their child may have accessed and they raise a complaint. Instead, what we're seeing is organized groups. Who do I mean? I bet you know. Moms for Liberty, which has been designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an extremist anti-government organization. There are chapters here in New Jersey, in Bergen, Morris, Burlington, Ocean, Cape May, and guess what? Mercer County. Those chapters are active. In fact, We were wondering if we might see some of those people here tonight. Another group you should be mindful of in New Jersey is No Left Turn. They're especially active in South Jersey. Team PYC, that means Protect Your Children, and the New Jersey Project. Another trend that we see nationwide that happens here in New Jersey is ad hoc decisions being made by school administrators. A great example of that occurred in Roxbury in Morris County, where last year the superintendent received an email regarding the book Let's Talk About It. That is a sex education book told in graphic novel format. What's supposed to happen by policy is that you form a challenge committee, a book review reconsideration committee, to read the book and make a decision about it. This administrator, this superintendent, just wanted to sweep it under the carpet, so made a decision independently that that book would be removed from the shelf, put behind the librarian's desk, and require parental permission to check it out. So that's happening with great regularity. And then one of the newest things we're seeing, this is around the country, is that, why go to all the trouble of banning a book when you can just keep it from being purchased in the first place? So the book banners are now going after school policies to prevent book purchases. And we've already seen that happen here in New Jersey in Sparta, which changed its policies. They modeled them after the policies in Central Bucks, Pennsylvania, which are draconian. The word lascivious actually appears in the Sparta book policy. Librarians in Sparta are required to examine the books before they purchase them. And I know I have some librarians and former librarians in the room. We can't do that. But it's a way to make the librarian the scapegoat. And in Sparta, the public is permitted to enter the library at any time to inspect the contents of the library. So any educators or librarians in the room know what chaos that is. We're also seeing across the country greater attacks on public libraries. Same here in New Jersey. In the last year, there were attacks on the Glen Ridge Library, Cedar Grove, and in Hunterdon County, where I work, in June during Pride Month, there was like a food fight on the Hunterdon County Library's Facebook page protesting their Pride displays. And then, although we're delighted to hear and so hopeful for the wonderful legislation that Senator Zwicker has sponsored, there's alternative legislation afoot. Senators Testa and Durr are threatening to draft legislation to impose ratings on books, which, some people say, oh, that sounds common sense, we do that for movies. But there's quite a difference between an industry agreed upon and adopted rating system and one imposed by the government designed to censor. So that's a quick overview of the national trends and how they're playing out here in New Jersey.
Thanks, Martha. It's a lot to take in, right? Brielle, you and Garden State Equality have been working on the front lines, organizing youth and communities, and I've heard you speak about this. So can you share a little bit about how these book bans and trends are impacting the LGBT community?
Sure. So one of the things that you mentioned was that this is an attack on libraries or education or school systems. And I think the biggest thing that we're missing is this is an attack on youth. I think that there's a lot of policy that's happening right now, and we're forgetting that at the root of all of this policy are kids that want to learn, or kids who want to see themselves, or kids who just want to be. So instead of me talking, I'm going to read to you two testimonies from actual New Jersey youth about how they feel about book bans. So one from Warren Hills in Warren County. I would not have the confidence to speak out on LGBTQ+ and other social issues without books that affirmed my queer identity. I was, and still sort of am, a very shy and reclusive child, which meant books were my world. The first queer character I came across was in my favorite series, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I had loved the books for years already, and when I finally got to the House of Hades, and it was revealed that one of my favorite characters was gay, for the first time I felt like I could be a hero too. We hold fictional characters on a pedestal. They teach us right from wrong and show us what it means to be human, vulnerable, brave, emotional, resilient. All of that means teaching us to respect ourselves and each other for who we are. If I hadn't read The House of Hades in middle school, I would have taken a lot longer and a lot more guilt and self-hatred for me to come out and finally feel comfortable in my skin. Taking books away from students is taking away that affirmation, that admission of self-love and respect. In whose mind is it okay to tell a child to hate themselves? Because that is what's being said when schools ban books. Credit goes to Bailey Asbury. I just want to make sure that I give him credit for being brave enough to write about this. But the last one, that one was about how books make them feel. But this one is about what it's like to read books in schools. Because most of us haven't been in school in a long time. I know I look young, and I haven't been in school for over 15, 20 years. Actually, my 15th high school reunion is next week. So it's been a long time. But this person said, I think that banned books deprive students the ability to honestly learn about the world around them. Looking at the list of the most commonly banned, I see books that I've read both in school and at home, in middle and high school, including those that I borrowed from class libraries. I was never just handed a book and let loose to do whatever with it. We had meaningful class discussions and pre-reading materials that allowed us as students to think about the perspectives, reasons, context, and people behind each novel. We were encouraged to think critically. And I know that I've learned so much from the novels that we read that I wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. Banning books hurt students, especially those who are represented in books that get banned. Leaving students uninformed about the world does not protect them. I don't think there's much more to say there, but then that's what's happening in these spaces, and you heard that from youth. But I think that, as we as adults are thinking about how we move forward, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of fear because of where we were. And it's different. We need to listen to those who are being affected by these policies, by these banned books. They are the ones who are looking for answers. They're looking to see themselves. They're looking to see that they can be successful. And as you do that, they're not seeing that, and that changes the way that they look at the world. So.
Thank you so much for bringing them into this room. It's so powerful to hear directly from impacted students. Casey, you mentioned earlier the idea that so many of the attempts to ban book or censor topics are about racism or about LGBTQ themes or stories about those experiences. And so on the surface, it really seems to be about restricting information, but it's also really a lot deeper. And I guess I'm wondering, I'll open it up to all of you, if you could, when you think about these censorship campaigns, how do you think about it as far as its intersection with power and marginalizing people and communities?
I'll kick it off, but then I'll pass. I think there's so much to say here. And when we think about, whether we ground it with students being represented or we ground it in public school, there is a long history of exclusion. And I think, where we start tracking increased efforts to ban books in public schools is right around 2020, where we all reckoned with George Floyd's murder and the pandemic and lots of other things that were happening on a much broader cultural scale. And I think in that moment, we saw districts, many school systems, look to increase diversity and look to increase representation and look to rethink their curricula to be more inclusive of their entire student body. And that's where we see a really active campaign to resist those efforts. So, in some ways, I see these things as happening they're intersecting or they're in conflict with each other. Many school districts, many educators, many librarians, are really looking to bring books that are more representative of our pluralistic society into the classroom, and is being met with a really vocal minority who's pushing quite strongly and effectively, unfortunately, against that representation. So I feel like that's, that to me is really what I see playing out here, is just efforts to include being met with efforts to maintain that status quo and to maintain that exclusion. That is our history. I don't think the ideals of our public education system have certainly not been realized, whether we're thinking about curriculum or funding or access or quality or whatever. And this is just another way that we see, just efforts to restrict, exclude, maintain, rather than grow, include, and open up, increase opportunities for many. So that's how I see that intersection between sort of power and the marginalized communities that are most affected in the books that are being banned.
Absolutely. I think mine is a little more personal. I'm a Black woman. I'm also a part of the LGBTQ community. In high school, I went to a boarding school. There was only 3 Black people in my class. There were no Black books that we read. There were barely any Black students for me to relate to. There was one Black family on campus that I could kind of talk to, but that would be generalizing that all Black people have the same experiences, so they would know what I'm saying. And they weren't queer, so there wasn't really anywhere there. And one of the biggest things we think about is our hair. So to give you an example, being this person who looked different than everybody else, the ideals of my hair and loving myself and loving who I could be or who I would be came from books, magazines, representation. It's not just about being a person of color. It's not just about being queer. Many women in this room could say that until you saw maybe someone in office who was a woman, or someone in a book who was a woman who was an engineer, or any of those stereotypes that we saw, you were like, you know what, I can do that. And for those marginalized communities who don't have access, maybe their parents don't have that education, these books give them a pipeline to success. So when you're thinking about what that's like, and I couldn't agree anymore that it is to observe a status quo, when you give these people the power to know that it's possible, then they go out and do it. And I think that is at the root of why they're banning books, because they don't want them to go out and do that. We can continue to, perpetuate hatred and segregation and discrimination if people don't feel like someone did it before them. So when you think about, why this is so important, it's for that young person who could be the next president. It's for that young person who could be the next senator, who's going to change the world. But they need someone to see that it can be done and to know that it's real. So I think that kind of answers the question, because, without access, marginalized communities don't see what it's like. And a lot of people who are making the decisions don't have the lived experience to know what that feels like, to be isolated and to not have that pathway. So yeah.
Like you, Brielle, I take this very personally because I am with those kids every day, hundreds of them. And I see the kids coming into the library, and you can tell, with their body language, how they're feeling about themselves in general, even where they choose to sit and how they sit. And one of the books in particular that they went after in my case is a book called This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. And when the attempted book ban played out, there was a reconsideration to ban This Book is Gay. And I was absolutely not going to let that happen. And why is that? Because that, of all 5 of those books, was the one that kids had checked out the most often. And I don't know if you've ever seen This Book is Gay, but it has bright rainbow stripes on the cover and giant block letters that they say this book is gay. And I personally have checked that book out since 2015 to 33 different students. And every time a kid takes that book off the shelf, walks across the library filled with their peers, some of whom look at them with contempt, hand that book to me, an old bag they barely know, and check it out. I am awestruck by the risk that kid is taking and the bravery, and frankly, the trust they have placed in me. That relationship to me is sacred, that they're saying, I trust that I can share this piece of me with you, and you're not going to demean me in any way. But what's happening with these book bans, and I knew it the minute all 5 of those titles came across the airwaves, that this was a proxy war. It has nothing to do with books. Books are just the tool. Books are the instrument to go after the people. And in my case, those people are my students, those people are my kids, and they are not going to take those tools away from my students. The other thing I'm seeing happen with this is now that they've gotten such traction with the books are now a launch pad to go after much bigger, broader agendas. Things like what we're seeing in New Jersey here with the forced outing, the trans policies. And the other thing that is happening here that is also a power move is the rhetoric around this. The rhetoric is extremely damaging. The hate speech, frankly, is becoming normalized at board meetings. It is the way this is discussed in the most vile, despicable terms, and that is also a way of asserting power. Using that kind of language to keep people in their box, to other them, and frankly take power away from them, and keep the power where they want it.
And if I could just chime in, just to bring some awareness. So I told you, 15 years since high school, right? So 15 years ago, there were no LGBTQ books. Like, I didn't know any books that had queer characters in them, and right from then, I knew I was queer. There were no queer characters on TV. There were no queer characters anywhere. That didn't influence my thought process. It didn't influence who I became. It's not the books, although you said it's the tool. That's the tool to affirm children, but they're going to be who they are regardless of a book or a movie. So taking away the book doesn't change the outcome. Actually, it would make them feel more comfortable in their skin the sooner they get the book so they don't feel different or feel ostracized. So their mental health isn't impacted by the fact that no one in this world looks like me, loves like me, I feel alone. No, because this book is their friend or is their pathway, like I said.
Thank you both, or all three of you. Just a reminder that we're collecting questions, so if you have any, please, Carla's got cards and you can pass them to her, and Paloma's got them over there. So, Martha, one of my questions is going to be to you about the toxic rhetoric and personal attacks, and it's obviously so vile and impacting communities, but I know I've also heard you talk about the kind of ripple effects or the soft censorship that happens, and I guess I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about how it's not just the challenges, but about the culture around these attacks.
Sure. So, actually, Suzanne Nossel of PEN America, I love PEN America, talks about that's actually baked in to book banning. It's part of what's intended to happen. Because with a ban, you can only go after, one book, one place. But what's baked into it is to create a climate of fear so that we can do the book banners' work for them. And I'm sad to say that research from School Library Journal, they have published this 2 years in a row now, librarians, and these are just the ones who admit it to the School Library Journal survey, are admitting to just quietly removing the books that they know are going to be contentious, just getting them out of the library so they don't have to deal with it. So that's one kind of soft censorship. Another kind of soft censorship is just not buying the book in the first place because they know it's going to be too risky. And I can't tell you, I am a reluctant user of social media, mainly for my professional learning network. So this week and last week in particular, I can't tell you the number of posts I've seen from librarians around the country who are talking about they're not even putting up a banned books week display this year because it's too risky. They don't want to call attention to themselves or to those aspects of their collection. Just to throw some statistics at it, School Library Journal has found that 47%, about half, of school librarians admit to voluntarily removing materials in 2023, this year. That's up from 42% last year, so their fear is growing. And why do they pass on purchasing books? The cause for that most often, 75% say if there's a book that has sexual content in it, that's most likely to get them to pass on buying a book. 37% say if it's LGBTQ content, they may pass on it. And, I'm not going to claim innocence here. There's a book on the New York Times bestseller list right now. It's called Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And when I saw it on the bestseller list, it's got a dragon on the cover. And I know how much my kids love reading fantasy. So last week I looked it up in Follett, Tidal Wave. For my librarians in the audience, they know that Follett is the major school book distributor for school libraries. It has multiple starred reviews from Booklist and Publishers Weekly, I believe. I'm like, ooh, this looks good. And then Follett had a little statement, and they will often point out books for you that, this is written for an adult audience, but they will point out books that will have teen appeal. It says, great for teen audiences, and then I saw the scary words, sex on the page. Those are scary words these days for a librarian. And I had to sleep on it. I was like, oh, God, do I really want to go through this with this book? I slept on it and I read the book. But it's hard.
I was just going to briefly add, because I do think it's important, and suddenly I find myself talking about sex like the most in my job these days. I'm like, let's talk about sex in books and why it's important. But, when we think about the rhetoric and we think about the efforts to ban books, there is this, conflation of these books being harmful or not appropriate or whatever, insert word. Where 75% of all books banned are young adult books, are picture books, are, truly picture books, are middle grade books, are chapter books. Those are the books that we count. So these books are already identified by professionals, identified through association and journals, and given lots of review and thought. Even before they get there, they're conceptualized, they're designed, they're written for young audiences. But these are the books that are the most, affected in book bans. And I find this past school year alone, we had 193 recorded bans on picture books. And I always find that to be most illuminating because, to the points we've all raised earlier, it's not the books. There's nothing in this picture book that could be deemed anything other than innocuous. Except for an identity or an image or a flag or a symbol or something else. And that's I think in some ways it really captures, unfortunately, the movement is how we see it play out in our books for the youngest readers.
Thank you. We have some questions from the audience. I'll start now. I will start with one from someone who's a parent. We know our kids best, and the books that parents are upset about are actually harmful to our children. Shouldn't I have the right to decide what my children have access to?
Oh, can I get that? First, thank you so much for asking the question. Thank you for being a parent who cares about what your kids read. But with respect, I want to disagree with the premise of the question, that the books are harmful. First of all, there's no harm in the book, other than maybe a paper cut. And if you open the book and find that there's content that is unsuitable for you or your child, the book has a cover. You can close it. You can put it back on the shelf. I know in my library, I have 20,000 other choices to offer you. And if we engage in a conversation about your concern, then I can find a book that fits. It's sort of like a shoe store. Try it on, you don't like it, I'll get you something else. But when you come after me with a sledgehammer and try to ban that book from everybody else, it doesn't really work that way. One of the things that we hear a lot is that these books are obscene and that they're pornographic. That is your opinion. Both of those are legal definitions that can be applied only by a court. There's a three-pronged Miller test. I encourage you to look that up. But the fact of the matter is that kids are going to grow up, go out in the world, they're going to encounter a lot of stuff. Life is messy, life can be dangerous, and it's best to equip them with knowledge. It's trite, but true knowledge is power. I do agree, however, that you absolutely have the right to manage what your children read and access. One of the phrases we hear a lot from the Moms for Liberty crowd is that I do not co-parent with the government. But paradoxically, that's exactly what they're asking for. They're asking an instrument of the government, their public school or their public library, to do the parenting for them by removing access to the books. The better way to go about this is to be the parent, have a conversation with your children about what your expectations are, your limits are. If you do not trust your child to adhere to your expectations and limits, you can have a conversation with the librarian. When you identify a title that's problematic for you, talk to the librarian. I'll do it. I can put a note in your student's library record that says, parent objects to this book is gay, please do not circulate. When your child comes to me, I'm going to say, I'm so sorry, I can't circulate this book to you, your parent has asked me not to, perhaps I can recommend another. But it's much better to have a conversation with your kids, with your librarian, than to cause a public uproar.
So you brought up one of the arguments that Moms for Liberty uses, and another one of our questions asks, can you talk about the arguments being used to justify book bans? Are they religious, political, racial, moral? And how does this figure into the proxy war that you've mentioned?
The quick answer is yes, they are all of those things.
Yes. I think there's a lot of nuance. So your district may look different than somebody else's district. Your state may look different than somebody else's state. We've seen the way in which state legislation that has very clear prohibitions, or what we call gag orders, on certain types of content can lead to book bans. So that could be a decision from, Governor DeSantis' office where we're prohibiting content and instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity, or the discussion of how advantages and disadvantages based on race may make somebody feel upset. So those are like prohibitions from a state that also will remove books. And then there also are parenting group challenges, and those can come through lots of different viewpoints and a lot of misinformation. And often they're grounded in maybe personal beliefs, but often connected to what I continue to just call a campaign to foment anxiety about the types of books that students are accessing in schools.
Great, thank you. I got two related questions. One is about, so should the huge access provided by the internet and social media be a source of optimism in the face of these bans? And then relatedly, Governor Murphy signed into law that students will learn information literacy, and how can parents support schools about information that's being vetted, created, and shared?
I believe that there is cause for optimism with the availability of information on the internet, because that's one of the ways that parents can actually learn about books. Just as I read book reviews before I purchase a book from the library, they're available to you too. Go to Amazon. Those professional reviews are listed right there. However, it's a double-edged sword, because there's tons of misinformation out there as well. And I do want to highlight one of the tremendous sources of misinformation. It comes to us again from our friends at Moms for Liberty. It is a faux book review site called booklooks.org. Now, if your idea of a book review is like mine, which is paragraphs of written text that talk to you about character, plot, theme, style, etc., you won't find that at booklooks.org. What you'll get is a number, like 4. It's a scale of 1 to 5. 4 would be a bad score. You know what that for? Wicked by Gregory Maguire. Not for anyone under 18. How many of you have taken your kids to see Wicked on Broadway? So what you get at booklooks.org is the number 4. And then literally a list of bad words and how many times they appear. So that kind of extremely reductive, ridiculous, out of context information is what is passing for a book review and is easily available online. Which brings us to Governor Murphy and the Information Literacy Bill, which you can thank. There's somebody in this room you need to thank for that, who worked very tirelessly. Eva Elliott, immediate past president of the New Jersey Association of School Librarians. So that bill will give us information literacy instruction K through 12. So we will be graduating much more sophisticated consumers of information who will know how to stop, interrogate the source of their information, find better coverage if the source of that information is inadequate, and trace claims back to their original source. So all of this nonsense, kids will now be equipped to deal with. And hopefully they can teach their parents a thing or two as well.
Related to that, though, I heard some speakers talking about how the internet can't be a replacement for banned books. I was wondering if you guys had any big picture thoughts about that.
I'll just speak from my experience as a librarian. I don't know about the other librarians here, but I cannot pay kids in my high school library to read a book online. The kids who read, the people who read, they want to read a physical text. I'm holding a favorite book right here. I love a physical text. And there's something wonderful. We're in a bookstore right now. It's very much like a library. There's something wonderful about roaming the stacks and the accidental discovery of adjacency. And that same thing just doesn't happen on the internet. So that's just some little anecdotal evidence from where I sit.
I completely agree with you because I don't like to read books online, but I did want to say, like, one of the topics or concepts we've been talking about is, like, the books in the schools and the government not taking away from the parenting. And I think one of the biggest things is if you have a question about a book, either as a parent, read the book, whether you're reading it online so you have access to it, or you're going to buy the book. If you don't want to buy the book, then you can take it out from a library, but read the book. But then think about reading the book with your kid. Like, I think one of the biggest things is that a lot of queer youth aren't having conversations with their parents. That's why they're looking for information. So when you're thinking about, like, relatability or representation, some of these queer kids don't have a queer parent, not someone who can talk to them. Or some of these black children don't have a parent who may be knowledgeable in the government. So they're looking for knowledge. And they're not looking to not do it without their parents. If it's an affirming home, they can have that conversation and read that book with you all. So if there is a conversation that needs to be had, there's a book that they want to read, and you're feeling kind of nervous about it, read that book first. Have that conversation with your child, or read it with them, and have that much needed discussion. It might make you feel a lot better about what they're ingesting and what they're interpreting and taking from that book that they're reading.
One other thing I wanted to mention, the book will also give the kids and the families the vocabulary to have that discussion that they might not have otherwise. And one other great plug for libraries and bookstores, don't underestimate the power of curation, which is not something you're going to have on the internet. A school library is, absolutely creme de la creme of information and literature for kids. We're purchasing only the very best with your tax dollars. And when kids are left, to what's out on the internet, they're just scraping gum off the floor.
I was going to have the briefest story, but I was with my friend who has a first grader who just started, and I was like, oh, how's school going? What's your favorite subject? Without a beat, this was like 2 weeks ago. He doesn't know my job, obviously. He was like, libraries. I was like, why? Your favorite subject is libraries? What do you mean? And he was like, yeah, I just love going to the library, and I go, and I get to bring 2 books home. And he was so just like that whole idea of like self-exploration, run around the library, pick out a favorite book. And then I had to ask his mom, I was like, well, what's Pat bringing home? And she's like, oh my God, you brought home like a World War II novel the other day. Like, there's like the chapter books and the picture books, and then he's just bringing home the picture that looks cool on the cover. But that's the beauty of it. And then they could flip through it, and they have it in their house, and then they bring it back, and he gets 2 more. There's something like so rich about that experience, and whether it's book bans or whether it's schools that are closing libraries, whether it's classrooms that are being emptied of books. I mean, all of it is just, an assault on our learning, assault on information sharing and knowledge building, and the real, the essence of our school systems.
It's so exciting to see little kids with books, right? It's such a great thing. One of our audience members brought up the idea that comprehensive sex education is another, we're seeing attacks on that, and I was wondering if any of you have thought about the connection between these types of book bans and access and sex ed.
Every day.
So much. It's hard to disentangle a few. Even when we look at kind of the way legislation is playing a role, so many states have legislation prohibiting discussion as well as an abstinence-only state curricula, which just, will continue to perplex me. I went to Catholic school too, so before I ended up in public school, I know what that was like. The questions I had, where did I go? Forever by Judy Blume. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. That was my sex ed. I could use, a little bit more. But yes, it's hard to disentangle the two. It's so, it's so important. I think there's a lot of lack in our comprehensive sex education. And even this year alone, we saw more books banned, compared to last year that just touched on topics of health and well-being. And that's what you also get in comprehensive sex education. And those are, that continues to be increasingly targets of book banners as well. We extend, to your point, the movement is constantly extending and sweeping more content and more areas, more issues, more identities, all sorts of topics.
It's all of a piece. The book bans, the comprehensive sex education, the forced outing of trans people. What was it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? I can't even remember. My husband and I went down to Trenton. I was giving testimony before the State Board of Education on behalf of the New Jersey Association of School Librarians, which was a dreadful experience. I was surrounded. It was me in a sea of Moms for Liberty types. But my husband made a very astute observation as we were booking our way out of Trenton as fast as we could, which is, it's the same people over and over and over again. Watch these board meetings online. You will see there's a traveling freak show of crazy people. Let me shout out the revised Reverend Gregory Quinlan. He will show up at the opening of an envelope to tell you about him being an ex-gay and the Ghana study. They are the same people, small group, and they punch the same buttons on all of these topics. So it's frightening, but smaller than you think.
And just the last point would be the language that they're getting, whether it's from a book, whether it's from a class, that same language that people are tearing down, they're also the language that saves lives. Sometimes, students are young, they don't know how to express themselves. So when they're in danger at home and they don't have the right language, who's listening to them? Sometimes that danger is, like I said, right inside their home. So without the language in a book or the language in a space, they can't advocate for themselves. But the issue is that it seems like they don't want them to advocate for themselves, and that's why they're all intertwined.
So we have a lot of questions about what we can do next, and so Brielle, I see what you're holding, and I guess I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how young people have been responding to censorship and bans and these.
So absolutely, I have two things in my hand. One of them is a equality coloring book that Garden State Equality is about to release. One of the things that we talked about was, at some point you all knew what you wanted to be when you grew up, probably, and you saw someone who could be that person. And this book highlights LGBTQ icons across the gamut of history, but some who are right here in New Jersey, like Marsha P. Johnson. The one I'm holding up is Bayard Rustin, and the reason why I did that was because not only is he a black man, but he's also a gay man who had to choose between being gay and being black at certain parts of his life, which is the experience that many black queer people face, especially in their homes. So if parents are looking for a resource This is a way to have a conversation with your kids in the simplest way. Not only does it have icons, but it also has things like what are pronouns, or things like what the different families look like. These are the tools to give them the language and also to know what you are teaching your kids. So you have tools like this that allows for them to maneuver and navigate a path where they can actually have a healthy relationship with you as they find their identity. And then the last one is a Pride zine that we just released. This one uplifts the voices of BIPOC queer individuals 14 to 24 years old through art, poetry, graphic design. And what we've been seeing is when kids see this, they're like, so this one page, it says, it gets better. And it says, it gets better, I promise. For one of those kids, that is exactly what they needed to hear. And exactly what they needed to see. When we released this zine, there were kids who were like, oh my gosh, I see myself. Oh my gosh, I can't talk about this at home, but I want to talk about this with my mom. This is how I can do that. They're looking for a way that if their voice doesn't carry, that a book can connect the two. And that is one of the powers of having books. So if you're looking for one of these in the future, you can come and find me, or you can look us up and you can email me, and we'll make sure that we get you one. The coloring book will be released soon. But like I said, these are resources for parents, so that we're not saying don't have those conversations with those kids. We're saying have the conversation with them and educate yourselves and them at the same time.
Well, I wouldn't be a decent librarian if I didn't curate some stuff for you, so I curated some stuff for you. So there's a handout back there. Band Books Club friend back there. But yeah, there's a handout that's a little colorful half sheet. That's the one. That sheet has a whole list of actions for you and a tiny URL that takes you to Resist Bans, where I have a ton of stuff for you. But I'm going to break it down real simple. One of the things you can do if you haven't done it already is go home tonight or on your phone when you get Wi-Fi, is join Unite Against Book Bans, uniteagainstbookbans.org. That is a very comprehensive site put together by the American Library Association and partners like the wonderful PEN America, where there's a fantastic toolkit for you. One of the links that I have curated for you on that sheet is this menu from Let Freedom Read. It's a whole list of actions you can take if you have 5 minutes, if you have 15 minutes, if you have 30 minutes. So there's tons of stuff you can do there. I already mentioned stopping disinformation. I gave you the steps. I didn't tell you the handy acronym. The SIFT technique. It's what I teach my students. Stop. Investigate the source, find better coverage, trace the claims. You have access through that little handout to my resources on the SIFT technique. The most important thing you can do is vote and make sure other people do it too. Now, it has never been more important than ever to vote for your Board of Education. And people struggle with, who the heck do I vote for Board of Education? Where do I find out about that? Well, on the resources I've curated for you, you will find links to Districts for Democracy, that's Tom Malinowski's effort, and another one called boardofeducation.vote, where book-friendly candidates are listed for you. So there's no excuse not to make an informed vote for Board of Education. Vote. Make sure your neighbors vote. Help them get there.
One of our specific questions was how to get parents to pay attention to Board of Education elections. I was wondering, do you have any particular insight into that issue?
To get them to pay attention to the election, tell them what is happening in New Jersey. Some of the horror stories I told you tonight. Nowadays, many of our Board of Education meetings are available on video or audio. Watch or listen to one. Show your neighbors some of the really contentious, horrible things that are going on at the Board of Education meeting. If you watch one of these meetings, I invite you to watch the September 28th, 2021 meeting of the North Hunter and Voorhees Board of Education, or watch the Roxbury Board of Education in Morris County, or the Sparta Board of Education in Sussex County, or the Hanover Board of Education, where they're trying to get rid of the policy 5756 and ensure forced outing. These meetings are horrific. Watch one, and that will set your hair on fire and get you to the voting booth.
Absolutely. I was going to say, if you don't want to just watch one, you don't have to be from the town that the Board of Ed meeting is in for you to go. Go and listen. Listen to what both sides are saying and make the decision for yourself. But the question you ask, are all they tied together? Yes. If your candidate is voting for book bans, there is probably a 100% chance that they're also voting against policy 5756. If you believe, and this is one of the things that we talk about, these elected officials, they have the responsibility to make sure that every single child that walks into that school is safe and affirmed. So if that is the case, that they are banning books that don't let them see themselves, they're banning policies, don't let them have bathrooms that affirm them, then they are not doing their job. And therefore, you need to come and do the research, because these people are in power and they're affecting the kids. So I started by saying, at the root of all of this are the youth. If you believe that, then you will also do the work to make sure you know who these candidates are and what they stand for, and go out and vote, because it makes a huge difference, and you will be saving a life.
So follow your New Jersey advocate. Don't help you out. Follow Penn, but then really reach us up. We just try and uplift what's happening locally. I will just quick plug for the national level. If you are interested in, email every representative, your school board, your state, your U.S. representatives. Just this past week, Representative Raskin and Schatz introduced a resolution on book bans, and not anti-book bans, the right to read resolution. Penn was a part of that. But if you go to our webpage, you can send that resolution to all of your elected officials, from the school board all the way up. So you can use it as a template, you can make it your own. But there's lots of action pages out there for you to just flood the inboxes to let people know that we, are standing together to oppose book bans and defend the right to read.
And ACLU of New Jersey is also a place where you can learn more about book bans and find facts. So just to put a plug in for us, and we're working with all these partners to make sure that all communities have access to education and the right to learn. So with that, I think we will conclude our panel, and I just want to thank our panelists so much for their work.
Hello there, how are you? My dad said, I was just talking about That's
That's another.